So we move ahead to the next session, and for that, I invite our esteemed chairpersons, Dr. DP Singh sir, Dr. DP Singh sir, Vijayachari sir, Shaheen Ahmed, and Gautam, to take over and start this project. Start the proceedings. DP Singh sir and DK Singh sir.
Good evening, everybody. This is very important session on heart failure, and Professor Yushi Samal, who is one of the speakers in this session, always used to say heart failure is a final pathway disease, and in every indoor admission, heart failure admissions are predominating. So we have many eminent speakers in this session. I will request all the moderator and all the chairperson to join. For the first session, chairperson is Dr. Praveen Sinha. I will ask him to call for the first speaker, Dr. Ashok Kumar, who is going to speak on management of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Dr. Praveen Sinha, please call the first speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And good evening to all of those present in the conference. Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is a rapidly expanding condition, knowledge about which we are gaining day by day. And recently also a lot of new trials and new therapeutic modalities have come. And we would love to hear Dr. Ashok Kumar, who is a leading cardiologist from Patna, about the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction and what the recent advances have been made in this. So over to you, Dr. Ashok.
Good evening, respected chairperson and present august audience. Today's my topic of discussion is management of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. A bit controversial topic with less and very few defined and stamped therapy for that. I would try to justify my talk within provided time. So, first of all, coming to the definition of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, this is the widely and most acceptable definition of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. That means patient having sign and symptom of heart failure along with ejection fraction, left ventricular ejection fraction of more than 50%. There are certain other terms that needs a bit more clarifications. Heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, that means EF less than 40%, and patient is having sign and symptom of heart failure. As we all know that heart failure is a clinical diagnosis. So very less other things or investigating modality needed to diagnose heart failure. Here the ejection fraction is not the simple criteria. Less than 40% heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, more than 50% normal or preserved ejection fraction, and in between is labeled as heart failure with mid-range ejection fraction. But many trial and guideline still confusing, because recent most guideline that has included that has been done with empagliflozin, and that had included ejection fraction of more than 40%. So there is still a bit overlapping between the value of ejection fraction. So, yeah, coming to the prevalence in our own country, worldwide prevalence of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is more than 50%, whereas only 26% that has been seen in Trivandrum heart failure registry. Still, it is more common in women, obese women. And coming to the mortality of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, in hospital mortality is about 5%, whereas 1 year mortality is about 30%. We all know that the mortality of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is a bit lower than the heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. But that is not true when the patients get readmitted and patients need hospitalization. Then the mortality is higher comparing to the heart failure with reduced ejection. So the mortality by use of guideline directed medical therapy, even for the heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, if patient is getting guideline directed medical therapy, the survival is even better than the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Coming to the pathogenesis, the multiple diastolic and non-diastolic abnormalities in cardiovascular function contribute to the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction pathology that includes cellular to extracellular and ultimately leads to congestion of left ventricle, pulmonary edema, and congestion of systemic congestion. That manifests the sign and symptom that is responsible for the manifestation of sign and symptom of heart failure. In very brief, I would like to compare heart failure with reduced fraction, ejection fraction with preserved ejection fraction. Usually, reduced ejection fraction is more common in men, whereas diastolic dysfunction is more common in elderly, obese female. And impact on vasodilator therapy that improves LV systolic performance in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, whereas it has got little impact on LV systolic performance because already the systolic function of the provided patient is good. This algorithm is very important to diagnose or to for the provided by Heart Failure Association to diagnose and manage, confirm the diagnosis of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. First is a step P, PEFF, that stand for first P is presentation of the patients and initial evaluation that includes X-ray, ECG, echocardiography. And another E, that is step E, is to evaluate, do echocardiography and etiological evaluation. Next, F is to finalize the etiological workup and finalize the diagnosis. And they have given some scoring system. If the patient having two major criteria or one minor criteria, that has to be labeled as heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Otherwise, on the basis of functional morphological biomarkers during sinus rhythm and atrial fibrillation, they have given some point. And if the total number of point is more than 5, the diagnosis of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is established. If less than 5 and patient is still having sign and symptom of heart failure, then we have to do some stress test or invasive hemodynamic measurement needed to establish the diagnosis of heart failure with preserved ejection. Now coming to the treatment part. So what are the major pharmacological group that could be used for the treatment of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction? So drugs that control blood pressure and may impact hospitalization like ACE inhibitor, ARB, ERNI, spironolactone, and beta blockers. But drugs that may improve symptom or exercise capacity without worsening outcomes like loop diuretics or isoservide mononitrate that has been used traditionally. And what are the goals? Main goal is to control the comorbidities because heart failure with preserved ejection fraction usually associated with 2 to 3 chronic diseases. So we have to control the comorbidities, and among those most common comorbidities is hypertension. And hypertension is commonly associated 50 to 70% of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Next goal is to minimize the morbidity by relieving the symptoms. And next goal is prevention of the hospitalization, but still there is no proven treatment to reduce the mortality in this subgroup of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction patients. Till date, there is no proven treatment to reduce
Dr. Kumar, you have to unmute.
I think we are not able to hear anything.
Technical support should help Ashok.
We are not able to hear anything.
Technical support should help. Praveer ji, can you ask the
Yeah.
technical support to help?
Can anybody hear me from the technical support? Hello?
Yes, we.
Please do
No.
something. You know, slide share should be done again, or something should be done.
Am I audible?
You are very much audible, sir.
You are audible and visible, sir. But the
Uh,
speaker is not audible or visible.
but we are trying, some technical problem is there. We are trying to solve it out. Yes. क्या हुआ? यहीं से क्यों नहीं बोलता?
बुनियाद का स्लाइड आया था ना, उसी में था नीचे लिखा हुआ।
आपको लग रहा है कि वही एड्रेस कर रहा है बुनियाद कंपनी का,
ना ना
क्योंकि लाइव दिखा रहा है उसमें।
हाँ, तो ये नियाज का जो है ना, हमारा जो सेटिंग हुआ था उसमें नीचे में लिखा था नियाज को करा के। हाँ, फिर से इसको अथी करें।
फुल स्क्रीन करिए इसको।
डॉक्टर वीडियो सेटिंग।
Yeah. Sorry for the technical glitch, but always it is better to have some hurdle in between, because now we are going to this is the impaired preserved study, and this is the only ray of hope in the treatment of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. And the main result of this trial is going to be published or delivered on 27th of August this year on European Society of Cardiology. But I have gathered some information. So this was done, impaired preserve, done with empagliflozin 10 milligram compared with placebo, and the composite endpoint was cardiovascular death and hospitalization. And this is a bit newer type of study, because this has involved the artificial intelligence in doing all the things. And summary of the inclusion criteria of recent heart failure with preserved ejection fraction trial, and that include many like TOPCAT that have shown some benefit in secondary endpoint, but primary endpoint the trial was negative. Paragon HF also a negative trial with EARNI impaired preserved. This is the trial only hope in the treatment of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. DELIVER was done with SGLT2 inhibitor dapagliflozin, that was also a negative trial. And inclusion criteria was heart failure with preserved ejection fraction more than 40%, and included the patients of more than 18 years, and about 82% of patients was NYHA class 2. So more like a normal clinical scenario. And the plan was same as impaired preserved and impaired reduced. So both was planned in similar way with in patients with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction as well as with preserved ejection fraction. You can see that 82% of patients was in NYHA 2 class, and comorbidities was comparable than in the other trial also. So comorbidities, and there was structural diseases like flutters, LB hypertrophy, increased size was in quite significant number of patients. So Impera Preserve 93% of patients were enrolled based on the structural changes in the heart. That is very important. So treatment at baseline in Impera Preserve was similar, and guideline directed medical therapy was taken in more than 2/3 of the patients. And it enrolled about 6,000 of odd patients. Mean age was about 72%. That means elderly patients. Diabetic was 50%. Hypertensive more about 90%. And background therapy was there. So this is the media report that published on 6th July this year, that Impera Preserve phase 3 trial met its primary endpoint and demonstrated significant risk reduction with empagliflozin for the composite of cardiovascular death or hospitalization for heart failure in patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. As we all know that heart failure with preserved ejection fraction has been classified as the single largest unmet need in cardiovascular medicine based on the prevalence, poor outcomes, and absence of clinically proven therapy to date. With approval, empagliflozin would become the first and only clinical proven therapy to improve outcome for the full spectrum of heart failure, regardless of the ejection fraction. So empagliflozin significantly reduces the risk of cardiovascular death and hospitalization. In this, safety was established. So evidence from the, and these are the mechanism of action, how EMPA acts. I'm not going to much details. This is the summary of this trial. Most probable cascade mechanism of empagliflozin in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction with 94% accuracy was its efficacy was due to it reduces cardiomyocyte oxidative stress, it reduces systemic inflammation, reduces extracellular matrix remodeling, and concentric hypertrophy. Most important thing of this trial was empagliflozin could reverse 59% of protein alteration, and that is relevant in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. This is my second last slide, and this is very important because when a cardiologist referral recommended and mnemonics is I need help, that means whenever patients need IV inotropic support or worsening in the NYHA functional class, end organ dysfunction, reduction in the ejection fraction, and hospitalization if BP is low, these are the things we can refer to the competent cardiologist. So to conclude, control of symptoms and congestion, reducing the risk of hospitalization, and strict control of comorbidities like hypertension and diabetes are the goal of pharmacological management. And empagliflozin is a newer ray of hope in the management of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Start ACE inhibitor, ARB, in a low dose, add beta blockers, mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. These are class 2A indication, but not for the mortality benefit. Follow up in 2-week interval and up titration of the disease modifying agent. And remember the mnemonics, I need help, to refer to cardiologist. Thank you. Thanks. And sorry for the technical glitch.
Thank you, Dr. Ashok, for an excellent presentation. You gave a very extensive idea about the genesis and the management of current drugs in the management of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. And of course, we have to wait for another month for getting to see the detailed results of Emperor Preserve, so that we may utilize empagliflozin also in our clinical practice. I think we are behind schedule, so there shouldn't be any questions from the floor. And over to Dr. BP Singh, sir.
President, the Heart Cardiology Society of India, Dr. DP Singh.
Okay, so we are having the fantastic session on heart failure, and we have got the master cardiologist, Dr. UC Shyammal sir, and he has been attached to this heart failure registry. Even is the panelist of International Heart Failure Association and whatnot. And so chairperson will be Dr. P.K. Ojha from Patna or Ashok Kumar Singh from Bhagalpur. Anybody can take up. And so welcome to Dr. UC Shyammal sir on heart failure. That is the upfront treatment on heart failure beyond guidelines. sir.
Welcome, Professor UC Samuel, sir. I think such discussion, talking beyond guidelines and giving pulse of wisdom can only come from a person like Dr. UC Samuel, who is clearly the living legend of cardiology in Bihar and Pune. So I invite Dr. UC Samuel to deliver his talk, please.
Thank
Please.
you very much for these kind words. My first appraisal is that heart failure is a progressive and persistent disease with high morbidity and mortality. But what happens? You go by the guideline and you find GDMT that they start with a small dose, gradually uptitrate the dose until you get optimization. This is the reverse to that. Contrarily, it should have been aggressive treatment to control the situation. Needless to say, ultimately, the course of action is previous in indolent against the primary objective of the treatment. To objective of treatment is to retard and disrupt the progress of our disease or to prevent hospitalization and mortality. Now, just to justify this, I'll go for the next slide. This is the key slide. I see all the guideline treatment is given here. Guideline treatments are here. SC inhibitor, beta blocker, MRA, and ARNI, all are there. But you see,
क्या कहाँ से दिक्कत है, यहाँ का कि वहाँ का?
Glitches are going on. Very much interrupted. We are moving the late session due to technical glitch.
Dr. Saman, you're muted. Can you unmute?
okay, that's so it was so this is the final point, that if you are going in the conventional way, that is given in the guideline, you will take 28 to 56 weeks to fully implement the treatment. Next. Now here is the clumsy part of it. All the guidelines are put together. Now if you look at it, this looks like a Pandora's box. It is very difficult to streamline and simplify. But we know that as you look to the guideline of a different guideline, SEC and ESC and so on and so forth, the clinicians are challenged with innumerable decisions and diversities, cannot decide what to do. More so, the global guideline expert consensus pathway may offer different consequences. Finally, as you simply look at the total number of drugs that is used given in the guideline, there are 9 S inhibitors, 6 ARBs, and 1 ARNI, and 2 MRA, and also 6 beta blockers. Now, looking at the basket of drug that is there, it is very difficult to decide appropriately which one is the best and how to go for it, because all these are different target doses and they have got different schedules. Next, please. This is just an impression to give that all the guideline therapy when instituted, what happens in terms of hospitalization and mortality. This doesn't carry any sense to me here. The only thing I see, look at hydralazine, which is a drug which is very toxic and mostly contraindicated in case of coronary artery disease, and also when long-term use causes renal injury, and it becomes very, but this drug gives a great promise. You could see the number needed to treat mortality is 7, and also risk reduction is 43. And also hospitalization is reduced by 33%. But we cannot use it. Besides that, in a routine case, CRT and ICD should not be used. No, it's not expected to be used. Next one, please. Now, here is the most important slide. If you take the most potent guideline therapy, S inhibitor, receptor blocker, beta blocker, aldosterone antagonist, ARNI, and SGLT2. And its relative risk reduction is fantastic for all of them. But you have to wait for the 2 years to find out what is the mortality like. So the cumulative risk reduction, if all evidence-based medical therapies are used, relative risk reduction is 74%, absolute risk reduction is 25%, and number needed to treat is 3.5. It looks all fine, but here there is incompatibility, or you call heterogeneity. S inhibitor and ARNI cannot be used together. You cannot give them together. Next one, please. Here is the gem of 4 drugs: ARNI, beta blocker, aldosterone antagonist, SGLT2. But again, you are giving in a traditional way, one after the other, and then you have to wait for 2 years to get the result. And that mortality benefit is not very tenable. Next one, please. So here is the ice break, and simultaneously initiation of GDMT has been the new concept. Rationale for initiating the GDMT as the first prescription in case of heart failure to reduced ejection fraction is a new talk. Rapid improvement in health status within one, if you give it, rapid improvement in health status within 1 to 8 weeks. Rapid improvement in left ventricular remodeling is 12 weeks. Rapid reduction in heart failure hospitalization, 2 to 4 weeks. Rapid reduction in heart failure hospitalization within rehospitalization is 2 to 4 weeks. Rapid reduction in mortality in 2 to 4 weeks. Wonderful. And really, if you can start all these drugs together, and this benefit is bound to come. And this is the supportive evidence of publication of 19 and also 20, and this European Heart Journal, and also you find this McMurray NEGM, and so it's source a very authenticated source of. Next one, please. So the real approach to concept of additive therapy, the benefit of heart failure with reduction in medication are additive and incremental. That's the first thing. All the 4 drugs we have said. No substantial overlap has been demonstrated for 4 key evidence-based therapies and heart failure reduced ejection fraction, particularly ARNI, beta blocker, and mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, and SGLT2. The optimal approach is to utilize each medication in a demonstrated to reduce the all-cause mortality in combination, so long as not to be contraindicated, of course, and not to be otherwise considered derogated. Start all of them together without delay. If we are going to serial and selective approach, will lead to delays and also heart failure, hospitalization, death, which could be improved with more comprehensive and earlier way. Next one, please. Next one, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the final point, and this is the most beautiful aspect of the story that I'm going to tell you. Sequencing of GDMT by parallel status, not one after the other, parallel together, and from the first dose itself. Now, if it is ARNI, it is day 1, it takes 2 to 4 weeks for optimization. It is beta blocker, from day 1, you titrate 1 or 2 weeks interval. It is a target dose will be just within 2 weeks. And similarly, MRA, the target dose will be 2 weeks maximum. And SGLT2, it is a day 1 from from which the drug is instituted. So all four, these are the four pillars of survival enhancing medical therapy of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Benefits of each demonstrated within 30 days of initiation. Cumulative benefit within 30 days, that is more than 75% risk reduction, and day 1 to GTMT is just within 1 month. Possibly this is a marvelous way how the drug can be used, and it's the new way that is the heart failure is being treated with reduced ejection fraction. Next, please. Now, here is a beautiful thing. You see, a person at 55 years old, patient with reduced ejection fraction is administered with comprehensive therapy and the conventional therapy. This is the comprehensive therapy is the upper one, down one is the conventional therapy. In the conventional therapy, you get only survival up to 11.4 years. But comprehensive therapy, new therapy, 17.7 years. It is 6.3 years of additional life gain. That becomes a very important point, what's the best aspect of it. Next one, please. Next one, please. Now, we know heart failure has got 5 mechanistic pathways. The sympathetic system, and here angiotensin, that RAS system, and neprilysin, that is, and the third one is the SGLT2, where you find that the volume is being, because you know sodium and glucose, they are covalent. So once in this condition, the volume is best regulated because you lose more of water and sodium together. And mineralocorticosteroid is, you know, that is a multifaceted drug, both cardiac, vascular, renal, and it's all beneficial. So all these 5 pathways are being, next one, please. You find these are the 4 drugs, 5 mechanistic pathways, and all are being done under 6 additional years of life. So 4, 5, 6 is the pathway that what we treat today, heart failure with reduction factor. And here we call it upfront treatment. From the day 1, you are adding all the drugs, and you find at the end, by the end of the month, you do optimization. So this upfront treatment is different from the classical treatment that we follow today. And this is how I think the most acceptable. And this is the future treatment of heart failure with a reduced ejection fraction. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think instead of a stepwise approach, initiation of all drugs which improve mortality in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, I think the House will more than agree with whatever you said. And very shortly, we will see ARNI, an SGLT2 inhibitor in the basic foundation therapy for the heart failure instead of ACE inhibitors and beta blockers. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir. Wonderful talk. Professor
Can I comment? Can I make a quick comment?
Please.
Sir, I'm yet to see a better deliberation on systolic heart failure than what I have seen just now in last 15 minutes. Wonderful. And combining all the drugs together, this is wonderful. This is wonderful.
And from the first day.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Vijay Achari is there. Dr. Vijay Achari is there. No. So I invite Dr. S.K. Sinha to deliberate his lecture on management of acute decompensated heart failure. To chair the session, Ashok Kumar Singh, Bhagalpur. Is he there? No.
Ashok Kumar.
Dr. Ashok Kumar Sinha is there? Singh? No. Dr. S.K. Sinha from Kanpur? Oh. Okay. To start your lecture. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Dr. Sinha. Unmute yourself. Dr. S.K. Sinha, unmute.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Take 1 minute.
Just wait a moment. I'm trying to connect by screen, sir.
Okay.
Can you see my screen, sir? Hello. Can you see my screen, sir?
No, it is not visible.
Or it's not visible.
No, sir,
Okay,
we
sir.
can't see your screen.
Okay. If there any problem, Dr.
It will take another couple of minutes, just a couple of minutes, sir. Or in the meantime, you can ask, you can allow someone to speak, sir. Meanwhile, I'll try to join, sir.
We will go to next speaker. Shaheen Ahmed is there. Okay, Shaheen Ahmed. Moderator is there. Shaheen Ahmed? No. So I invite Dr. Aditya Kapoor, who doesn't require any introduction, who will be speaking on use of electrocardiography in management of heart failure. It will be a very interesting topic for all of us. With these few words, I invite Dr. Aditya Kapoor for his deliberations. Dr. Aditya Kapoor, please.
Thank you, sir. I will share my screen in a minute.
Yeah.
Is it visible, sir? Is it visible, sir?
Yeah, visible.
Yeah. So thank you, Bihar CSI. Thank you, organizers. I can see Nishant on the screen. Thanks, Nishant. Thanks, Dr. Bharti. Thanks, Dr. Abhinav, Dr. Ajay Sinha, Dr. DP Singh. It's a pleasure always to be associated with you guys. And this time it's a unique experience. We'll be connecting with each other virtually. So I'll be speaking in the next about 13 to 14 minutes on how to use the ECG to fine tune your management for heart failure. We all know as physicians that ECG is the cornerstone of diagnosing and evaluating heart failure patients, but often we overlook some subtle points which we'll discuss by case examples. First of all patients with suspected heart failure should have an ECG. So this is an undisputable statement which we should all remember. The sensitivity of an abnormal ECG for diagnosing heart failure is in excess of 90%, and the specificity is also good. So the carry home message is a normal ECG is unlikely in heart failure. So for all patients of heart failure, apart from clinical examination, X-ray, ECG is a mandatory thing. So we'll discuss these 7 points quickly. Rhythm abnormalities, QRS duration, voltage changes, a few words about bundle branch block, myocardial ischemia, a brief word about congenital heart disease, how we can pick up important congenital heart disease in a clinical practice if the patient is getting heart failure, and last slide about quickly about CRT as well, how to understand whether the CRT is in place or not. So quickly coming to the first two parts, this is a 57-year-old patient who had ischemic cardiomyopathy, triple vessel disease, bad LV, recent non-compliance with drugs and worsening pedal edema. So clinically, we know that the patient is getting worsening heart failure. And this is the ECG. So the first glance at the ECG tells us, apart from the other things, the patient is having sinus tachycardia. So this is a very, very subtle clue. New onset sinus tachycardia indicates worsening heart failure. We might need to step up beta blocker. If he doesn't respond to beta blocker, might want to consider ARNI, or ivabradine is a good choice for these patients. So this is the point of showing this ECG, because sometimes this just escapes our attention. So sudden new onset sinus tachycardia. And we all know that ACE beta blocker, mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist should be used, but now of course ARNI are the new kids on the block, and I think we have had some discussion about the Fantastic Four. So SGLT2 inhibitors can also be added, but that is beyond the purview of this topic. So the point is, new onset sinus tachycardia should be paid attention to. Now this patient comes back 1 month later with palpitations and worsening heart failure. He's having some degree of pre-syncope as well. So if you see the ECG, it shows a irregular rhythm. So new onset atrial fibrillation in these patients, again, a common cause for worsening. We often do not compare the ECG with older ECG. So not only new onset sinus tachycardia, but new onset atrial fibrillation. And we should of course attempt rate control. Important again, carry home message for these patients with recent onset heart failure. You should always try rhythm control if the patient is grossly symptomatic, if it's a young patient and the heart failure is clearly being exacerbated by the atrial fibrillation. So these are three situations where we should aggressively try rhythm control for atrial fibrillation and heart failure. Changing the gears, 11-year-old girl with heart failure and palpitations. So you look at the LV, it is grossly dilated. If you look at the ECG, it shows a long RP tachycardia. So this is again another common cause, tachycardiomyopathy. It's a reversible cause for heart failure, permanently curable by radiofrequency ablation. So new onset sinus tachycardia 1, atrial fibrillation 2, and pay attention to the ECG. Sometimes this is mistaken for an ectopic atrial rhythm, or people even mistake it for sinus tachycardia, but this is tachycardiomyopathy, especially common in young patients and totally treatable. Another patient who's having diabetes, mild pedal edema, some shortness of breath, fatigue, tiredness. This is the X-ray which is unremarkable. So if you look at the ECG shows AV dissociation. So the point of again showing this ECG is that in elderly patients, AV dissociation or AV block can lead to heart failure as well. So remember, both tachy and bradyarrhythmias can lead to heart failure. Another patient, no previous coronary artery disease, diabetes, but having shortness of breath, orthopnea, ejection fraction is low. So again, the point of showing this ECG is it's an intraventricular conduction type, conduction defect of a LBBB type, but pay attention to the QRS duration, a very wide QRS, a notched QRS. This should make you wonder whether the LV is scarred. So these patients are especially prone, not only they have LV dysfunction, but they are prone to get ventricular tachyarrhythmias as happened in this patient. So both tachyarrhythmias, both bradyarrhythmias can lead to heart failure. One should understand what to look for in the ECG. A very interesting ECG of a patient of heart failure. I wanted to show this because if you see this, the QRS looks very funny. So whether it is two QRSs, whether it's a bigeminal rhythm, whether it's a P wave, which is notched over here. So we'll just examine this ECG in detail. I'll blow it up over here. So clearly it cannot be bigeminy because two QRSs cannot follow each other in succession because the ventricle will become refractory by the previous QRS. So we cannot have two QRSs. So this is clearly not a bigeminal rhythm. It's an extremely widened QRS. If you see, the P wave is right here. So this is an extreme widening of the QRS. A broad QRS, fragmented QRS, which is like this, notched, broad. It indicates that the LV is scarred. If you do a strain imaging, the patient has got a very scarred LV. So pay attention to the tachyarrhythmias, bradyarrhythmias, and even the QRS duration. That is a very, very important sign of a bad LV and prognosticates these patients of heart failure. Wider the QRS, worse is the prognosis. And in fact, recent data has shown that if the QRS duration reduces by therapy, people have shown studies with sacubitril valsartan that when the QRS duration reduced, the patients did well. So this is again another important thing to keep in mind. Quickly coming to voltage changes, the patient, he had heart failure, no previous MI. If you see this ECG, shows low voltage complexes. There is QS in inferior leads, QS in the anterior leads because of electrical cancellation of forces. Because the LV gets scarred by MI happening in multiple territories, so there will be loss of QRS voltage. And any ECG in a patient suggestive of heart failure, if it shows a low voltage QRS, again do a good echo because the patient is likely to have LV dysfunction. Peripheral edema on admission, the patient was grossly edematous. At discharge 1 month later following diuretic, the patient's weight reduced because there was diuresis. The point to show this ECG is there is an obvious pickup in the voltages. If you look at the ECG over here, the limb leads, they show a pickup in the voltages. So this is again a very subtle sign that the patient is therapeutically improving. So not only pay attention to the QRS duration, fragmentation of the QRS, also pay attention if the therapy you are giving the patient, whether the voltages change. If the voltages are improving, that means the patient is making urine and there is diuresis and the patient is likely to benefit. What about left bundle branch block? It alerts us to underlying structural heart disease. So this is LBBB. We know diagnosing acute MI in LBBB, axis shifts and associated RV involvement. We'll just show you some quick examples. We all know this Garbosa's criteria. So sudden onset chest pain in a patient with LBBB. We know 5.5 ST elevation in the leads with a positive QRS, any ST elevation of more than 5 millimeter in the leads with negative QRS V1, V2, any ST elevation of more than 1 millimeter in lead V5, V6, or any ST depression in lead V1, V2, V3 is the Garbosa's criteria. So if you look at here, having 5 millimeter ST elevation here, 1 millimeter ST elevation here. So Garbosa's criteria are positive. Nowadays, people are teaching us that you can further fine tune your Garbosa's criteria, the ST by T ratio. Because sometimes what happens in LBBB, if you see over here, there is 5 millimeter ST elevation clearly there, but the depth of the RS complex is very, very high. So if you see the depth of the S wave is 40 millimeters, so the ratio of the ST by S is 0.125. But for Garbosa's criteria to be satisfied, this ratio has to be more than 0.25. So apart from Garbosa's criteria, remember this Smith's modification, especially if the QRS is very deep, look at the ST by S ratio for satisfying acute MI criteria. Whenever you get a left bundle branch block with a right axis deviation, this is a marker of not very sensitive, but a very specific marker for diffuse myocardial disease and invariably will be associated with congestive cardiomyopathy or dilated cardiomyopathy. So left bundle branch block with right axis deviation. 4 points when you can suggest that in LBBB and heart failure, there is biventricular involvement. A superior axis, a QR in AVR, a clockwise rotation as suggested by RS ratio less than 1 in V5, and low voltage extremity leads with high voltage precordial leads. So what happens in a normal LV? The axis is down. In LBBB with a normal ventricular function, the axis becomes horizontal. However, if the LBBB is there with either enlarged LV or biventricular dysfunction, the axis becomes slowly superior. So I'll show you some examples. LBBB is there. If you see, there is a superior axis. There is QR in V1, AVR. And if you look at V5, there is clockwise rotation, a deep S wave in V5. So this all suggests a biventricular involvement. If you have a voltage discordance in a LBBB setting, if you see, the standard limb leads have a low voltage, but the precordial leads have a high voltage. Again, a very, very sensitive marker of biventricular involvement. So quickly, I'll come to these 3 things which are left now. So myocardial ischemia, we've all been taught in medical school. Poor R wave progression from V1 to V3, ST elevation in V1 to V3 tells us of an old MI. How to decide if it's a recent MI or a remote MI, LV aneurysm is there or not? Of course, history echo helps us. If there is Q wave, complete absence of R wave, it tells us there is loss of viable tissue. But recently people have described that if it's a recent infarct, because you have a larger T wave in recent MI, so look at the T by QRS ratio. That is, if the T by QRS ratio is high, for instance over here, tall T waves, so if you divide the T by the QRS, the ratio will be high. So this is a recent event. If you see over here, the T wave is low, so T by QRS ratio will be low. So this is a recent infarct, this is an old infarct. So you can look at the T by QRS ratio. Another important thing, if you see over here, it's a QRBB pattern. Right bundle branch block is obvious. So note the QR pattern in V1 to V4. Normally in RBBB, you get a RSR pattern. So if you blow it up, if you get a QR with a slight ST elevation, this is a very, very specific marker. QR in V1, V2 in a patient with heart failure tells you an old anterior wall MI. Never miss this. coming to the last part, congenital heart disease, we'll often get these patients, infant in tachycardia, respiratory distress with a S3 gallop, cardiomegaly. And, we all know this ECG. The ECG shows a Q pattern in lead 1 AVL with the ST elevation. So this is very, very classical of L kappa. So never miss this ECG in an infant because this is a reversible cause of heart failure. Lastly, what to look for in a post-device ECG. We don't have much time, so I'll just show you the device being implanted. So as a clinician, we should just look at lead V1 because the pacing has been done from a posterior or lateral lead position. So you'll get a R pattern in V1 and a QS pattern in lead 1. So if you are getting this, that means the device is good. However, if you are getting a negative complex in V1 and a positive complex in 1, that means there is some problem. So just pay attention to this ECG. So to conclude, this is a very good tool, often ignored in heart failure patients. Pay attention to rate, tachy and brady both, QRS duration, fragmented QRS, voltages, look at ND bundle branch blocks, QR pattern in V1, evidence of old or new CAD, and it will often predict the response to therapy and prognosis as well. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for your masterly talk. Your students are sitting, but the sir still gives some new information. Whenever a teacher gives a new information. So we are aware of the subject, Dr. Aditya Kapoor, and we would have loved to listen to you much more. And very good talk and useful talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So, SK Sinha from Kanpur, are you ready? SK Sinha, you are ready?
Sir.
Ready with your slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, respected panelists and dear audience. I'm indeed very thankful to organizing committee, Cardiacon Bihar, to invite me to share my viewpoint on management of acute decompensated heart failure. My association with Dr. Nishant Tripathi way back to more than two decades ago, when we joined the medical school in 1994. Coming back to the topic, the pathogenesis of pathophysiology of acute diastolic heart failure lies in, it is defined as the new onset of worsening of symptom and sign of heart failure, which is typically includes symptoms sign related to congestion and volume overload into hypoperfusion, and level of congestion and number of congested organ indeed carries a promising relevance in the management. Regardless of the underlying etiology, patients presenting with acute heart failure appear very similar to each other in terms of the hypoperfusion, short and water retention, which leads to the peripheral manifestation in terms of edema, often pulmonary dyspnea of pulmonary origin that worsens with exhaustion. We have to pay attention to 5 distinct treatment groups of the acute diastolic heart failure, which include, the first one is dyspnea with or without congestion, with elevated systolic blood pressure, which is more than 140 millimeter mercury, with abrupt onset of acute pulmonary edema, which is the most frequent type. The second is dyspnea with congestion with normal blood pressure in the range of 100 to 140 millimeter mercury, where the symptom is gradually in nature and they have often mild acute pulmonary edema. The third is dyspnea without the congestion, and patient present in hypotension, often cardiogenic shock. The fourth one is dyspnea without the congestion, and they have the acute onset pulmonary edema, which is mostly seen in setting of acute coronary syndrome. And these are the patients who first time present with acute heart failure without any prior history of either cardiac disorder or prior event of the acute heart failure. So they are the acute de novo heart failure. And the fifth is associated heart failure without any evidence of pulmonary edema, which is mostly seen in patients of associated aortic dysfunction. So acute decompensated heart failure will comprise only of the prior 3 categories. Now, if we see the data from the acute diastolic heart failure history, in most of the cases, in most of the patients, there was no factors identified prior to the hospital admission, in which, but at least in 50% of the patients, they have certain Harbinger sign, Either they have history of the tachycardia or history of uncontrolled hypertension, renal disorder, or they are non-adherent treatment, or probably they had a past previous ACS which got decompensated in some way. So acute de novo acute decompensated heart failure will be, include a symptom and sign of the heart failure, which will be correlated by at least one of the following: that is elevated natriuretic peptide or various other markers of heart failure, or objective evidence of cardiac pulmonary edema or systemic congestion. So it has been classified as the heart failure preserved ejection fraction with reduced ejection fraction, or borderline heart ejection fraction, or the patient who had reduced ejection fraction prior to the treatment, but with treatment they have improved. So that is heart failure with preserved improved ejection fraction. And these patients have been classified broadly into 4 stages: stage 1, A, B, C, and D. That I will not go into detail of this classification because I'm mostly concerned the treatment. Now we all know that the classification clinically they are classified on the basis of the major, minor, and minor criteria based on the Framingham scoring. Now in last 1 decade, they have come with another novel criteria that proposed by Stevenson, which classify the patient into 4 groups on the basis of the congestion or hypoperfusion. If they have none, they are warm and dry. Warm means the blood pressure is normal. Dry means the lung films are clear. Secondly, warm and wet means the blood pressure remains in normal range, but they have pulmonary edema. The third is cold, that is the fatal hypoperfusion, but the lung film remains dry. And the fourth is cold and wet, what we encounter mostly in patients of cardiac shock. And these are the group, the cold and wet, which carries the most adverse prognosis, as they have the hospital mortality in the range of 40 to 50%. So patient, when a patient with acute heart failure, we have to see whether patient are cardiac shock. If they are, we have to provide them circulatory support. If they have respiratory failure, again we have to provide them respiratory support. If they have none, then we have to look for the etiology, which will have acute coronary syndrome. That may be hypertensive emergency, some arrhythmia, underlying arrhythmia, acute mechanical causes, or pulmonary embolism. If there is none, then we have to work up on the basis that it can have something else that might be presenting with the dyspnea. Not as the patients are in acute heart failure. So if the patient has evidence of congestion along peripheral perfusion, that is they are falling in category warm and wet, we have to provide them vascular support in form of the vasodilator and diuretic therapy. And if they have predominantly congestive symptoms, we have to administer diuretic, vasodilators, and sometimes we have to go for ultrafiltration as well. If the patient is wet and cold, we have to give inotropic support, sometimes vasopressor, of course diuretic we have to give, and we have to also think for the mechanical supportive system, and vasodilator in form diuretic and inotropic support. If they are warm and dry, we have to adjust the ongoing treatment, and we have to adjust the beta blocker, ACE inhibitor, and sometimes diuretic as well. If they are in shock, that is dry and they are cold, means they are basically hypoperfused and hypovolumic, we have to look for the fluid challenge as well as inotropic support. So basically, the management of acute decompensated heart failure relies on 3 things. We have to manage the preload, we have to manage the afterload, and we have to manage the cardiac contractility. As far as preload management is concerned, we have to rely on the diuretic. We have to look for the fluid restriction. Of course, we have to go for the venodilators, mineralocorticoid antagonist, beta blocker when the heart failure stabilizes, because beta blockers are not basically contraindicated in acute situations. But once the patient stabilizes, of course, we have to look for the beta blockers getting prior to discharge of the patient. And we have to look for this maintenance of sinus rhythm. And we have to restore the normal sinus rhythm either by drugs or by the maintenance of asynchrony using pacing. As far as management afterload is concerned, we have to unload the left ventricle with the help of vasodilators, ACE inhibitors, beta blocker, and pulmonary vasodilators. And we have to improve the contractility using inotrope, digoxin, dobutamine, levosimendan, and sometimes CRT as well. So, if you look at the inotrope and various vasopressors that have been used to treat acute heart failure, they are dobutamine, dopamine, milrinone, enoxaparin, levosimendan, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. And all of them are basically used in acute situations, and none of them have been shown to be have acute mortality advantage. But yes, they also help in only stabilizing the patient and symptomatic benefit. If you look at the various study which have included the acute heart failure patient in various history, we can see that these drugs helps in the reduction of the rehospitalization and post-discharge. But of course, they don't have any mortality advantage. So if the patient is falling in dry and warm category, we have to adjust the oral therapy. If the patient is falling in dry and cold category, we have to consider inotrop until the hypertension is not improved. If they're falling void in a warm category, we have to look for the hypertension. If the vascular symptoms are predominant, we have to treat with vasodilator and diuretic. And if the predominant congestive symptoms, we have to decongest them using diuretic, vasodilators, and ultrafiltration, which I've already discussed in a previous slide. So, if the patient has respiratory distress as well, we have to rely more on non-invasive ventilation rather on ventilating the patient, because it has been shown that non-invasive ventilation fares better than invasive ventilation, and non-invasive ventilation basically relies on the continuous CPAP and intermittent positive airway pressure ventilation. Now, oxygen therapy, when we have to administer the oxygen in a patient of acute decompensated heart failure, if the basal saturation at the time of admission is less than 90% or pulmonary arterial systolic pressure is less than 60 millimeter of mercury, we have to go for the oxygen support. And intervention should be provided only if deemed necessary. That is, if the patient is not improving with the non-invasive ventilation, or patient has severe hypoxemia, or patient have evidence of CO2 retention or metabolic acidosis. Now, coming to diuretic, the first and foremost is a loop diuretic. When the patient presented with acute decompensated heart failure, the first and foremost treatment is loop diuretic, and it has to be administered in the intravenous way. But after 24 to 48 hours, the patient should be switched on the oral therapy, because with increasing passing time, patient starts showing the diuretic resistance or diuretic backing phenomena. The mechanisms are various. So, in order to cut down the diuretic resistance, we have to add the loop diuretic. Either it can be thiazide, or of late it can be chlorthalidone. Now, coming to ultrafiltration, when patient is not responding to the diuresis, patient not responding to the inotropes, then peripheral ultrafiltration to unload the ventricle is another novel option. But in the most of the large studies, it has not shown to be a lot more beneficial to the patient. But yes, of course, when we are left with no strategy, it can be tried. But there are a certain caveat with the ultrafiltration, because that needs large bore access, and a patient needs to have systemic anticoagulation. And yes, with increased bore access, patient have chance of increasing sepsis as well. So we have to keep in two things in mind. But yes, we have to see the pros and cons. If the patient is not responding to the conventional treatment in form diuretic and vasopressors, then we have to rely on the ultrafiltration as well. So basically, ultrafiltration on the guideline is a class 2B indication, and that is mostly based on consensus opinion and small non-randomized clinical trials. Now, these patients often present with cardiorenal syndrome. Cardiorenal syndrome is a entity in which the acute renal dysfunction may occur in patient of acute heart failure, or the acute renal dysfunction may lead to the patient with the heart failure. So it can be type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Means management of acute heart failure not only consider the cardiac entity, but also you have to look for the renal entity as well, because this is the only marker that can worsen the outcome of the cardiac failure patients. So we have to see how much renal function is worsening, how much the rapidity of worsening is, and we have to pay attention on the renal function as well. Now, coming to intravenous vasodilator, in order to treat the acute heart failure, we have got nitroglycerin, asaforbide dinitrite, nitroprusside, and necitide. Nitroglycerin, they have to start with the initiation dose and the maintenance. and their side effect is hypotension, sometimes headache, which is in 25% of the patients. But yes, if the blood pressure comes down to less than 90 millimeter mercury, you have to stop the nitroglycerin. But yes, if the blood pressure stays somewhere around more than 90 millimeter mercury, of course we can continue the nitroglycerin, but only for 48 to 72 hours, because again after 3 days they start showing nitrate intolerance, nitrate tolerance. So we have to switch on the oral treatment. Coming to nitroprusside, they are the vasodilator, they are the venodilator, and they work faster than the nitroglycerin. But yes, hypotension and cyanide oxide toxicity is one of the major concerns. Now, another drug we have in last last decade is necitide, which is used, infused as a bolus followed by infusion, and only side effect is hypotension. So the vasodilator as a group should be considered for symptomatic relief of acute heart failure, where the blood pressure, systolic blood pressure stays more than 90 millimeters, with or without symptomatic hypotension. Symptom and blood pressure should be monitored frequently, because once the blood pressure comes down, we have to switch off. We have to either switch them off or we have to taper the doses. And if the blood pressure falls more than 25% of the basal blood pressure, we have to stop them. In patients with hypertensive heart failure, means that is class 1, where the blood pressure stays more than 140 millimeter mercury, vasodilators should be considered as the initial and for front drug. Now, if you look at the pressure volume loop, in the patient with heart failure who have reduced ejection fraction, arterial vasodilators basically shifts the curve left and towards the upside. Means their LV pressure, filling pressure will decrease, and their ejection volume will increase. Whereas in contrast, steeper end systolic pressure volume relationship in heart failure, having preserved ejection fraction, results in more aggravated drop in blood pressure with vasodilator therapy. That's why we have to pay attention, and we should be very cautious in patients who have preserved ejection fraction, and though they have been heart failure but have blood pressure more than 140 millimeter mercury at the presentation. Now we have got nitrovasodilator, that nitroglycerin, nitroprusside, we have nitrotic peptide, we have serelaxin, various neurohormonal antagonists, and soluble guanylyl cyclase activator. And in most of the trial, they have not fared very well. But yes, they have only limited for their acute hospital administration, where the patient can have symptomatic relief. Now, there was one drug that liraglutide in cardiovascular mortality in acute heart failure patient. This drug came with...
Dr. Sinha, try to conclude. Your time is...
Okay, sir.
Try to within 1 or 2 minutes.
No problem. So coming to the last one, those patients who are presenting cardiogenic shock, these patients should be treated with inotropes, and we should be very cautious with the inotrop. And last but not the least, we have to pay the various antecedent factors which are leading to ischemia and presentation of the triggering heart failure, like diabetes, hypertension, and anemia, and pulmonary decongestion. With this, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. S.K. Sinha. It was really a wonderful talk. It was really difficult to compress such an elaborate topic in such a short time. But anyway, the take-home message is here that the old is gold. The old age-old medications are still the most powerful tools in our hands. And of course, in the case of cardiogenic shock, the newer mechanical devices, they are the only hopes. But the problem is this, that these modalities are not available at the places.
Agreed, sir.
Again, and congrats for such a beautiful, elaborate, and lucid talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, next is speaker.
Stop sharing, Dr. Sinha.
Okay, sir.
Stop sharing.
Stop sharing, please.
The next is DP Singh. You want to introduce?
Yes. I will introduce. So next speaker is the great cardiologist from Kolkata, our Mrinal Kanti Das sir. Welcome you from the Silk City, Bhagalpur. And you remember in 2016, you have been here. at Bhagalpur in our annual conference of CSI. And Dr. M.K. Das is immediate past president of National CSI, and he had been a speaker in ESC Congress 2020 on Indian position on STEMI care. He has published more than 70 papers, and he's an erudite clinician as well as cardiologist. He's a very good speaker. Let us listen to Dr. Mrinal Kanti Das, paradigm shift in the management of heart failure. Yes, sir. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great occasion that we are again meeting together for this very important Bihar CSI chapter conference. And really, I am happy to be back. And thanks to all the organizers as well as the executive committee for giving me the opportunity. Now, my topic is paradigm shift in the management of heart failure. All the previous speakers have done excellent job in presenting their deliberations, and I'll be just summarizing few of them so that you can see what is the paradigm. Before that, of course, I must define what is paradigm. Paradigm is not just a sudden change in the course of the road, or you are just crossing the road, not like that. You know, from pre-science to normal science, it may take some time for model drift, and from model drift there can be different things, different changes. We call them model crisis, and ultimately that crisis and drift ultimately can give you the picture of the revolution. And when the results are favorable, then only it is implemented, and we call it as a paradigm shift. Now, in heart failure also, there have been various paradigms, and I'll talk one after another. It's a global problem and global pandemic. But what has actually been the most important paradigm is the understanding of the heart failure, not only in terms of definition, but also that in terms of the mechanisms. And really there can be intermixing of many mechanisms like molecular biodynamics, cellular response, anatomic and morphologic changes, cardiac dysfunction, then circulatory perturbation, physiological response, then clinical manifestation. And sometimes the patients may be asymptomatic. So that's very important information, that the patient can be asymptomatic, and of course they can present with acute pulmonary edema or chronic heart failure. Injury or inflammation plays a very, very important role, and COVID-19 has shown that in a greater detail. The paradigm also shown that the RAS and SNS, that is sympathetic nervous system, are detrimental in the heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, and underpins the basis of therapy. I'm not going into the detail of it, but what is the conclusion from the SNS study, that is sympathetic nervous system study, is that the heart rate has become a very, very important modifiable risk factor. And apart from this, of course, the various comorbidities are taking part in the whole mechanism of heart failure, and that understanding has given us the various factors like old age, higher BMI, hypertension, then coronary artery disease, CKD. All these can play a very uniform game to give us the heart failure syndrome, and that can actually result in the manifestations. Now, the second paradigm has been the mechanism of heart failure in terms of the ejection fraction. And you have been already highlighted that there were principally two kinds of heart failure. One is the heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, and the other is the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. In between, of course, there has been the heart failure with mid-range ejection fraction. And later on, one more was added, that the heart failure with borderline ejection fraction. And all these can manifest in different ways, like acute pulmonary edema, then chronic heart failure, then they can be stabilized, and they can go for the end stage heart failure. But what has been highlighted in 2021 is the newer definition, where mid-range heart failure has been changed to heart failure with mildly reduced ejection fraction, and there has been additional heart failure with improved ejection fraction, where the ejection fraction is more than 40%. And all these are related to the higher mortality, and 5-year outcome is also very, very high. And potassium, the knowledge of potassium has given us a lot of impetus, not only in terms of the management, but also in terms of the prognosis. And there is a U-shaped curve, which actually shows that both the high potassium and the low potassium can give rise to the complications in terms of arrhythmias, as well as the lower contractility pressure and all, and they should be taken care of in the most proper way by giving the potassium supplementation or potassium the reducing agent. Now there has been the third paradigm, which is actually talking about the precision medicine versus the imprecision medicine. What we are practicing is the imprecision medicine based on our clinical acumen and various investigation findings. But what is precision medicine? They are combining all together with the help of the artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence, and they are collecting the data and ultimately giving you some information about the diagnostics as well as the therapeutic measures. And that is going to be a very, very important parameter, or the instrument which are going to influence the management of heart failure. This has been another important landmark trials in heart failure patients with reduced ejection fraction. I'm not going into the detail of it, but definitely from SOLVE trial to CIDIS to CHARM to emphasis to paradigm heart failure trials, various drugs have come out with like ACEs, ARBs, MRS, beta blocker, ivabradine, and of course the ARNI. And the latest trial that has been not yet included in the guideline, that is the COMPASS heart failure sub-study, which concluded that even the addition of the NOAC is helpful in reducing the mortality. And when it is used in a very low dose, 2.5 milligram BID with aspirin, and especially in the background of coronary artery disease or peripheral artery disease. And the fourth paradigm has been the influence of the guideline-mediated therapy, including the novel therapies, where you have to add aldosterone antagonists, SGLT2 inhibitor, then diuretic agent, hydralazine plus the isosorbide mononitrate, ivabradine, after the use of the ARNI or ACE or ARB or beta blocker plus the diuretic therapy. This is very, very important because GDMT has shown improved survival results, reduced frequency of hospitalization, reduced hospital stay, reduction of the cardiovascular events, adverse events, and decreased use of mechanical ventilation. And all this actually will be guided by the adherence as well as the compliance. And that will actually give you the important paradigm or very, very latest paradigm, that is the use of the step care therapy versus the conventional therapy in a different way. In the step care or conventional therapy, where you are using either ACEI or ARB, then beta blocker, then mineralocorticoid, then the neprilysin inhibitor, and ultimately the SGLT2 inhibitor plus minus ivabradine. Depending on the improvement or deterioration, you are gradually up titrating, and that used to require about 6 months or more. But in 2021, actually, the time duration has been reduced to a significant level, and that is in step 1, you should straight away start with the beta blocker plus SGLT2 inhibitor. Then within 1 to 2 weeks, you should go to the step 2, that is use of the ARNI, and then in the step 3, within 1 to 2 weeks with the MRI. All 3 steps are achieved within 4 weeks, and up titration to target dose thereafter should be done. And that's why the quadruple therapy for a heart failure with reduced ejection fraction has become the norm nowadays. And I think it is going to be pentuple therapy very recently, maybe in 22 or 23. Remote optimization is a very important paradigm, and we can control the heart failure, diagnose the heart failure with the remote system, and especially the various mechanisms like the what is called the smartphones have changed the paradigm, because you can actually diagnose ahead of time, and you can guide the patient. And this Empower Heart AIM Health system is also helping in different states, especially in Kerala and Karnataka. They have implemented this with the introduction of the Empower Heart AIM Health system, whereby the nurses are being activated with the various information. And as I was telling, that artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence is taking part in a very great way. And it will be taking much more important role later on, where it will guide you by telling that the beta blocker, whether you have taken the beta blocker or ARNI or diuretic at particular point of time or not. And if you forget, then it will give some alarm. And this biofeedback mechanism will be done through the wireless sensor with the artificial intelligence, and you will be getting all the informations, and you'll be guided from time to time, so that the mortality and morbidity really gets reduced. And the end-stage heart failure is known to most of us, that the end-stage heart failure has got really been taken care of in a very different way. The mechanical circulatory support system, transplantation, and cardiac transplantation, as well as the LV assist devices, they do actually take care of the various processes in that end stage of the heart failure. Of course, there are very few centers in the whole country which are taking this heart failure and left ventricular heart transplantation and left ventricular assist devices regularly, but definitely we are going ahead. And this is another important fact, that we must follow up the patients, and that's why the Hriday card, our heart failure passport, is another important chapter which is going to change the consequence of heart failure later on, and thereby we can involve not only the barefoot doctors, but also the nurses who can take care of the checklist, and thereby the reduction in the readmission rate, rehospitalization, and complications can actually be taken care of in a very definite way. This is my last slide, the decision pathway for increasing complex heart failure system, where actually you can have a journey for the heart failure treatment, where you have to focus on the symptoms, functional capacity, as well as improving the cardiac function. And based on those symptomatic as well as the diagnostic criteria for the congestive heart failure, you can go to the various drugs by guideline-mediated therapy, optimize the sympathetic modulators as well as the RAS blockers, and then address the GDMT initiating condition if there are azotemia or hyperkalemia, optimize beta blocker before ibabradine, take the help of the hydrolazine and ISDN combination in advanced heart cases where you cannot use the ARNI or even SE inhibitor. And definitely, as the last speaker, one speaker was talking about the I need help, you'll have to take the help of the cardiologist or the heart specialist, heart failure specialist, so that they can consider about the various device therapy as well as the optimal medications or the management of the end stage heart failure in a very different way. And with this few words, definitely I'll thank everyone for giving me the opportunity. It's a basically balancing act and extending the hand. If you can extend your hand to the other, and if you have the balancing act perfectly, then definitely the chance of survival of the patient will increase, not only from 7 years or 6 years to 13 years, but also maybe more. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Dr. Das, Dr. Das,
Yes.
you spoke like a master. Really, man, we are having such interesting talk on the heart failure, summarizing all the things. What is the paradigm shift? You actually shown on the slide. Really a masterful talk. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And remain stay with us. At last, we may have some questions from you. Stay with us. The next speaker is Dr. Athar Ali from Bangladesh. He will speak on new algorithm of device therapy in heart failure. Dr. Athar Ali, have you joined?
Yes, I have joined. Yes, I can. Can I share my?
Yes, you can share the screen with us. Yes. There you go. Is there any problem?
Yes, I'm just. So can you see my slide?
No, you are not able to see. नीचे तरफ हो गया क्या उधर उधर ही नहीं दूर गया नहीं हुआ उधर भी नहीं हुआ अच्छा हाँ हम लोग को म्यूट करो
Would you open up your you open up your PowerPoint presentation first and then share the screen? You open up your PowerPoint presentation first in your computer.
Can you see now?
Yeah, it is visible.
Can you see my slide?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So can I start?
Yes, sir. Please start.
Yes, thank you very much and good evening from Dhaka, Bangladesh. Thanks the organizer for inviting me and I'm very much honored to be here with you in such prestigious program. Good evening. So my talk is newer algorithm of device therapy in heart failure. So this is one of the slide I want to see as because these are some lists of the heart failure devices that are being used. There are some electrical devices like ICD, CRT, and the His bundle pacing. There are some mechanical circulatory devices, that is IABP, Impella, ECMO, like these. There are some also the devices that can be used in the valvular closure, that is the mitral valvular ring, and some monitoring devices. So these are the examples of devices that can be used for the treatment of the heart failure patient. But I will concentrate my discussion on particularly on the ICD, CRT, and His bundle pacing, as because these are commonly used and the patients are accessible to these kinds of the therapy commonly. So I'll concentrate my discussion on the ICD, CRT, and His bundle pacing. So now, at the present time, devices are facing challenges as because this is already discussed, and particularly my previous speaker, Dr. Mrinal Kanti Das, has introduced the paradigm shift and the introduction of some revolutionary drug like the Fantastic Four or the foundational device modifying therapies, particularly the MRA, ARNI, SGL2, and the beta blocker, has changed created some challenges to the device therapies, as because all these drugs has proved their efficacy for preventing the cardiac death, all-cause mortality, prevention of that is the reduction of the recurrent hospitalization, at least 25 to 35% in all the studies, particularly paradigm heart failure studies for the ARNI, then MRA studies, and recently the EMPA and the DAPA related studies, and the DAPA heart failure, the EMPA reduced and the preserved studies. They have convincingly proved that all these drugs can reduce and can reach the primary endpoints in a suitable time. So these are the challenges. These drugs has created some challenges for the device therapy. But in addition to this, in this slide, we can see there are some other drugs. That is the background therapy, particularly the anticoagulant, digitalis, ivabradine like these, diuretics like these. These are the drugs that are the grouped as the background therapy, as because these drugs can reduce the symptom, can give benefit, and sometimes can reduce the mortality and the recurrent hospitalization, but not as much as these 4 drugs can do. So these 4 drugs are grouped as the Fantastic Four or the foundational disease modifying therapies. And these are the drugs that have created some challenges for the device therapy. And in addition to this drug, the devices can be used for the treatment of the heart failure, particularly after titration, after optimization of all the drugs, not at the first time. That is, the role of the device comes after the drugs, not before the drugs. And from this slide, this is very important information that the benefits are additive. That is, one drug can give benefit on the last part of the slide, that is the bar. This is the benefit can be given, that is mortality reduction can be given by the only beta blocker. But when beta blocker is added with the ACE inhibitor, the ARB, the benefit is larger. Then when it is added with the ICD, much more benefit. So the benefits are additive. And after the combination of all the 4 therapies, up to a significant level, we can get the benefit, but we cannot stop that is the mortality. So there is some role of the devices at the last part of the treatment. That is, after the titration of all these 3 or the 4 drugs, still the patient may have some risk of the benefit, that is the symptoms, that is, they may not be totally cured from the symptoms, or will still carry some of the risk of the sudden cardiac death. At that time, there is the role of these device therapies. And particularly, the most important part is the risk of the sudden cardiac death, as because we know ejection fraction has got important role for as a predictor about the prevention of that is the risk of the sudden cardiac death. And on the basis of the ejection fraction, there is the role of the ICD. The indication of the ICD has been classified as because ICD in different studies has convincingly proved that it can reduce the that is the risk of the sudden cardiac death. And there are some indication of the ICD. That is the primary indication we know. The secondary indication we also know. I will not go into details. That is the secondary indication, particularly the cardiac arrest survivor, sudden cardiac death, or the syncope or inducible VT. And primary prevention, particularly post-ICM patient, 40 days after the post-MI, or in case of the non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, 3 months after the diagnosis. And in all the cases, 30%, 35%, or 4%. Like this is for the memorization of this indication of the slide. So ICD can prove its benefit for the prevention of the sudden cardiac death. But before deciding for implanting the ICDs, we must remember there are some areas which can be considered nowadays the contraindication, but these are the gray areas under studies. Now it is the contraindication, but once upon a time may proved that these are also the areas for the ICD therapy. So these are the gray areas which are under investigation, and we must not forget the complications of the ICDs, particularly in appropriate shock or the proarrhythmia. So this is the role of the ICDs, evolving role of the ICDs, particularly prevention of the sudden cardiac death in case of the heart failure. But this is not only the ICDs. During the follow-up of the patient, heart failure patient, during the follow-up, there are the other problems we face particularly regarding the heart rate, it may be the bradycardia, or there be the functional limitation, the still treatment with these drugs, that the conventional, the foundational therapy patient may remain still in the stage 3, stage 2, that is NASA class 2, 3, or 4, or this ejection fraction may be low. So these are the areas which can be addressed, and there is some role of the device therapy also. And this is the, again, device, this is called the CRT device in the slide. This is the even in case of the 1:1 conduction, not for the rate, only for the ejection fraction. As from this projection, we can see that is published in 2018. In this 4th step, you can see when the ejection fraction is low, in presence of some of the other criteria, they have recommended the use of the CRT. So CRT is one kind of the therapy that can be used for the symptomatic improvement or the ejection fraction improvement, not for the rate control only. And these are the indications of the CRT. And from the, we can compare the indications summarized by the ACC as well as from the ESC. There is some differences, and but this is very much similar to, that is a class 1, class 2, and class 3. I will not go detail, but just one thing is important. That is in case of the ACC criteria, this is the QRS duration in case of the non-LBB. These are the areas where the device is not indicated, but some of these patients are even fulfill the criteria of 2B in case of the ESC criteria. So these are the criteria given by the ESC and the ICS, almost similar. There are some differences, but in all the cases, this is class 1, class 2, and the class 2A, like this. And these are the results after implanting the CRTs. The patient may be super responder or non-responder, or patient may not show the significant response. That is not, this is called the not non-responder. The term should be a significant non-response. That is the, this is previously it is called the non-responder, but practically this is not a non-responder. Patient still gets some kinds of the benefit from this kind of the therapy. So these are the outcome from the implantation of the CRT. But what will happen when the patient will show non-response or some, that is the non-responders? There is some questions of the His bundle therapies. After these kinds of the experience, that is the CRT cannot fulfill all the expectations of the physician, all the expectations of the patient. At this time, there is some questions of the His bundle pacing, very much evolving phase, very much rapidly growing phase. There is some indication of the His bundle pacing, and why you should also consider the His bundle pacing, particularly as because RV pacing has got some disadvantages. We know, particularly it can induce the LVB and the ultimate the heart failure, and also the patient may experience some sign of the cardiomyopathy, and there may be some non-responder of the heart failure patient. So these are the areas where we can consider the role of the His bundle pacing. And now this is the very much evolving phase, that is the His bundle pacing, and His bundle pacing should consider in some of the cases, particularly when these are the indication of the His bundle pacing, not only for those criteria, that is the pacing induced cardiomyopathy, non-responders of the CRP. There is some other areas, that is in all the cases of the Brady pacing, where you can think about the Brady pacing, that is the role of the pacemaker. In this case, we can also consider the His bundle pacing, but we know this is the results from the very limited small number of the studies. This is not recommended still in the guidelines, hopefully should be included in the guideline, but still there are some areas, there are some operator, they are implanting the His bundle, particularly in this criteria, that is the 2nd or 3rd degree heart block, even in the 6th sense syndrome or the AV node ablation after the supraventricular tachycardia. So this is the role of the His bundle pacing. And not only in this case, also these are the areas in case of the particularly the atrial tachyarrhythmia, that is the supraventricular tachycardia, when there is the indication of the AV node ablation. In that case, we can also consider the role of the His bundle pacing. So these are the areas where the His bundle pacing are being used, and this is the protocol that can be used for the selection of the devices. And this was published in case of the Indian Heart Journal 2018 by the Misra et al. That is the asymptomatic heart failure, symptomatic heart failure, and the class 4 heart failure, and the selection criteria for the ICD, CRT, or the So this is one of the protocol that was advised at that time. And this is the protocol for the chronic, that is a complete heart block. And in that case, we have to consider the role of the ejection fraction. That is the complete heart block with ejection fraction less than 35. We can consider the CRT. In case of the ejection fraction more than 50, we can consider the His bundle pacing. And if the ejection fraction is in between this, we can consider either CRT or His bundle pacing. So this is the rule in case of the complete heart valve by using the His bundle pacing. And this is the condition. This is another group of the patient where there is a clean cut indication of the ICD, but the patient has got the atrial fibrillation. At that case, we can consider whether the patient is agreed for the AV nodal ablation or not. Depending on the patient decision, we can consider either the ICD or CRT or the hot CRT. So these are the also evolving indication, and particularly in some areas when there is some risk of the patient, that is how much the patient will be the paced during their pacing time. So depending on the percentage of the pacing, if the whatever may be the ejection fraction, if there is a chances of the percent of the pacing is more than 40%, we can consider the CRT, or if the percent is less than 40, then we can consider the conventional pacemaker. So these are the some. This is another group of the patient where you can consider the device, that is selection of the device, depending on the how much RV pacing will be experienced by this patient. So this is another group of the areas, and this is another example why we are not. That is why RV pacing is facing the challenges. This is the very common examples, and you know that is the disadvantage of the RV pacing for the development of the functional reduction of the ejection fraction during the patient's lifetime, and ultimately development risk of the development of the cardiomyopathy. So this is the flow chart for the demonstrating how the RV pacing creates these kinds of the heart failure. And depending on this, this is the feature of the CRT. That is the feature of the CRT. This is under the investigation. There are some many suggestions, many reports, many operators are doing many kinds of the things, and that should be expected in the included in the guideline. And this is the common, but this is a common protocol depending on the ejection fraction and the ECG criteria, whether the with the low ejection fraction, whether the patient has got the RVV, LVV, or the neither RVV or no LVV, but IVCD, and we can select either His bundle pacing, biventricular pacing, or His bundle pacing, or the RV pacing. So these are the some of the protocols, and this is actually suggested by the Pujagendi Vijay Raman. That is the protocol for the selections of the different kinds of the therapy. And this is the situation where the that is the CRT facing the challenges at the present time. And finally, this is the last slide. This is the published, the very recent comment, that is the published on the April 27, 2021. That is CRT facing challenges because of these kinds of the benefit. That is CRT versus the biventricular CT. The results are comparable, and the physical improvement is also comparable. So this is the final set. And finally, I want to show the first slide again, as because the importance of the drug should not be underestimated. These are the foundational therapy that gives the maximum benefit to the patient, and when the benefit fails, then comes the role of the device therapy. Thank you very much for being with me, and thanks for the patient sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Adharali. Thank you, Professor Ali, for your brilliant talk on the subject. Now we can have one or two questions. If anybody, panelists, or the other spectators who are logged in, we can have one or two questions. If I have one question from Mrinal Kanti Das, I have one question to ask from. Yeah, are we going to have a new drug for the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction? But that's why I want to comment from Emperor Preserve. Emperor Preserve, drug for the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Till all the trials are negative. We have heard that this trial is going to be positive, and new drug has to come as the armamentarium for treating heart failure with preserved ejection fraction.
So you are talking about heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. What should we do? What should we do? Is it that?
Yeah.
So,
no, I'm asking about the new drug, which is going to come in a few days or few months. new drug like empagliflozin for as a new drug. Emperor preserved trial.
For the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is actually phenotypically is a different ball game as compared to the heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Now, there are various trials that have been going on for a long time. Because of the multiplicity of the etiological factors associated with the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, except the diuretic, all drugs did not show really good result. But what has been shown in the Paragon HF trial with the ARNI, they have shown beneficial result with the female sex, with the females, but not so in terms of the overall mortality as well as the other the parameters. So this is one. And second is the Vericiguat. This is another drug which is being tried, and this has not yet come to the forefront, or rather in the guideline. That is also being tried for this. But apart from this, possibly no drugs have shown really good result with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, though we are talking about the aldosterone antagonist, especially the epinephrine and all this, but they are not showing the mortality benefit. Now, apart from this, also there are few other drugs which I am not being able to recollect right now, but mind it, the results are yet to come, and they have not shown the mortality benefit, though they have shown the reduction in the hospitalization, but not the mortality benefit as of now.
Any other people who are interested?
Yeah, one question from me, sir. May I ask question from Dr. Athar Ali, sir?
Yes. Welcome.
Yeah. So how frequently you are doing Hitch bundle pacing, and is there any clinical difference between RV pacing? Clinically, are you getting any difference between RV pacing and Hitch bundle pacing? And is there any problem with stability of the lead in Hitch bundle pacing?
Actually, my experience is limited. I have done the Hitch bundle pacing several cases. So from my personal experience, I cannot comment on this, but there are several studies. That is, there is convincing benefit of the Hitch bundle pacing. Actually, main target is the normalization of the QRS complex. There is no doubt. In case of the RV pacing, there is late bundle branch block pattern of the ECG. But main target for the conduction system pacing is normalization of the QRS complex to establish as far as possible the normalization of the QRS complex. In case of the previous lecture, you can see there is the smaller, the narrower the QRS complex, the benefit is. So it is the main target of the conduction system pacing is establishment of the normal physiology of the ECG as far as possible. And so this is the main reason of the benefit. So benefit is clean cut from the different studies. That is, Hitch bundle pacing has got superior benefit of the RV pacing. That is, the RV pacing what has got the decremental effect of the LV function. Possibly Hitch bundle pacing will not have. The experience is only 2 to 3 years, and we have to wait for the clean cut result for this point. I think.
And what about the stability of the lead in RV pacing? Is it stable,
Yes.
or
Yes.
the stability
Actually,
of lead dissolvation is there?
Actually, there are some limitation or disadvantages of the Hitch bundle pacing, as because it took the long, that is the long time to gain that is the long learning curve and stability of the lead. That is the lead stability is less than the RB conventional RB pacing, and some incremental increase of that is the RB3, that is the Hitch threshold. These are the few limitations of the actually Hitch bundle pacing, but late bundle pacing has got the less limitation in compared to the Hitch bundle pacing. Hitch bundle pacing threshold increase, lead stability is less, but in case of the late bundle pacing, the results are good actually in compared to the Hitch bundle pacing.
Thank you, everybody. All the speakers spoke well in this session, and we had all new information on the subject. I want to share one information with all people. Probably we are going to have a new drug for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Impaired Preserve is going to be presented in European Society of Cardiology. And that trial had come as a positive. Probably empagliflozin has been able to reduce the all cardiovascular death and hospitalization significantly as compared to placebo. Probably this is going to be presented on 27th August, European Society of Cardiology. And I thank all the speakers, all the participants, and I'm particularly thankful to Dr. M.K. Das, who has spent so much time with us and gave a wonderful lecture on the paradigm shift in management of heart failure. Thank you, Dr. Das. And thank you, everybody who have participated in this session. Thank you. Atal Ali, I'm especially thankful to you. You are our guest also. We had a wonderful lecture from you. And we hope in the future we will also like to invite you on this subject like device therapy in heart failure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I feel very much proud to be with you. Thank you very much.